Welcome everyone to the webinar from Am I Hungry called Wellbeing is a Skill and Other Lessons Learned from Science. My name is Rebecca Johnson and I am the Director of Workplace Wellness here at Am I Hungry, and I'm glad to see so many of you here live with us today. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to be here, and a warm welcome to those of you who are listening via the recording afterwards. Now, you all know that we are an organization that offers mindful eating programs and training. And so normally these types of webinars that we do are sort of specifically around mindful eating, sometimes around the weight neutral approach. And today we decided to broaden our horizons a little bit to talk about concepts that are a little wider than mindful eating. And specifically today we're going to talk about emotional style and well-being. We're going to talk about mindfulness as a way to shift emotional style, and then I will wrap up by kind of connecting the dots, so talking about what this stuff has to do with mindful eating and helping yourself and others transform their relationship with food. So to start, in the spirit of mindfulness, and also because this has some practical application to what we're going to be talking about today, I am hopeful that you will all just play along with me for a couple of minutes as we bring some attention to our breath. And just enjoy the gift of some space here for the next couple of minutes. If you are in a place where it's safe to do so, go ahead and just sit upright in your chair. Let your hands relax in your lap in whatever way is comfortable for you. And if you can do so and it feels right to do so, go ahead and just gently close your eyes. And just take a couple of deep, calming breaths to bring yourself to the present moment and to exhale out anything that is not serving you well in this moment. So perhaps you exhale some physical tension in your jaw or your shoulders. Maybe you exhale some tightness around your heart center. And then as you let your breath return to its natural, easy, comfortable rhythm, just bring your mental awareness to your breath, not with the intention of changing it, just with the intention of observing it. Noticing how it feels coming in and out. Use your breath as an anchor to the present moment. I'm going to be quiet for a minute or so, and in that space, all you need to do is just gently bring your attention back to your breath. You'll probably notice that there's a mental tug, that maybe you get lost in story without even knowing it, or maybe you get caught up in emotions or sensations, and all that's just perfectly fine. If you notice that that happens, just sort of observe that it did and let it pass as it will and bring your attention back to your breath. And when you're ready, take another deep breath in and out. Open your eyes if you have them closed and bring your awareness back to our conversation. Now, if you would, for me, head over to your chat box and just type in a word or two that describes how you feel right now. You can send it to all panelists so that I'll get it and not everyone will get it, but just type in a word or two that describes how you're feeling right now. Grounded, relaxed, at peace, calm, present, calm and centered, focused, relaxed, good, happy, soothed, settled. Notice that I need the bathroom. That's a good one. Focused, grateful, free, calmer. Okay, wonderful. And for every time I said one of those words that I just said, at least a couple of you had sent that in. Thank you very much. So what happens normally when we bring some attention to our breath like that, and mind you, that was really just a couple minutes in time, two things happen. And one of them is that we create an emotional shift. So if we were feeling uncomfortable emotions like anger or irritation or anxiety or overwhelm, we can often bring our emotional state back to neutral or even into a more positive, pleasant space, as evidenced by the words that you just sent in. And the second thing that happens when we start to pay attention to our breath and just create space is that we often become aware of information that we weren't previously aware of that was there, but we just weren't paying attention to it. So perhaps we notice that our mind is really whirring along, or perhaps we notice there's a sound in the room that we didn't previously know, or perhaps we notice that we have so much anxiety in our chest center and we're not even sure what it's from. So when we take a few minutes to engage in mindful breath or any other form of mindfulness meditation, we shift ourselves from the inside out. And what really happened in those few minutes is that you are altering your brain activity. You are altering the activity that creates thoughts and feelings in a way that was beneficial for you in the moment. And that brings us to our conversation today, which is really about the brain and an inside out approach to well being and how emotions are related to well being. I want to preface our conversation today by just letting you know, if you don't already, that there has been just an explosion of research in the fields of neuroscience and psychology, which have left us with a much better understanding of what is going on in our brains and how that's related to well-being. So we now know a lot more about this, even than we did 1 or 2 decades ago. And so I wanted to just give you a few little snippets of what we now know that I think has application in health promotion in general. It has application in our personal lives, and it certainly has application when we're working with others to help them make changes, including to help them change their relationship with food. And I want to start by introducing you to a person by the name of Richard Davidson, who's a researcher, a neuroscientist, and he's written a book called The Emotional Life of Your Brain. And I like his work because he introduces a new concept of emotional style. And through the miracle of modern technology and brain imaging, he's really able to kind of add a quantitative hard science element to the study of emotions in a way that I don't think anybody before him had been able to do. And so he's helped turn conversation around emotions from kind of a woo-woo, intangible, sort of out there conversation to something that's grounded in hard science. And what he's learned from his several decades of research is he's come up with a theory on emotional style as defined by 6 dimensions that I'll tell you about in a little bit. And interestingly, those dimensions of emotional style, we are able to sort of see where they reside or how they're activated in the brain. We know that they're governed by very specific and identifiable brain circuits and that we can objectively measure them. We also know, of course, that emotions significantly influence our physical health and well-being, and I'm hopeful to add to your understanding of that today a little bit. And fortunately, we know that if you want to change your emotional style in ways that would benefit your well-being and experience with life, you can absolutely do that. The dimensions of emotional style that Dr. Davidson talks about are here on your screen: attention, outlook, resilience, self-awareness, sensitivity to context, and social intuition. And just as a little FYI, I included a bit.ly address at the bottom of this screen, and this is a bit.ly address you can copy down if you want. It will just take you to a quick emotional style survey and introduce you to more of the work that I'm going to talk about today. For the sake of time, I'm going to spend a few minutes on 3 of these 6 dimensions: attention, outlook, and resilience, because I think they're most easily applicable to health promotion and mindful eating, and also because there's the most sort of hard science around these 3. I'm going to tell you a little bit about sort of define each of these, why they matter, and then we'll wrap up with how we can alter these if we so choose. Let's start with attention. Attention is the ability to purposely direct your mental awareness somewhere and keep it there. paying attention to thoughts or sensations or actions. So being in the present moment. The scale or the spectrum of attention moves from very focused to very unfocused. People who are very, very focused are more likely to be able to um, stay directed with projects and tasks, even in the midst of potential distractions. They may be people who are just really present in conversations. And then people who are at the very unfocused end of the spectrum are the opposite. They may have kind of a squirrely, fragmented, frazzled sense about them, have difficulty staying with any one task, maybe have difficulty staying in the present moment in conversations or other things. Now, we all fall somewhere on this spectrum, and probably most of us fall somewhere on the middle ranges. Attention matters, and I want to note that attention might seem like an odd piece of emotional style. Attention is not an emotion, but it turns out that the ability to maintain present moment awareness really significantly influences your ability to cultivate your own emotional style. Attention matters for reasons that are probably common sense to most of you. Certainly, it's easier for us to figure out what our priorities are and complete those in a timely way if we can be focused and minimize distractions or stay focused in the midst of distraction. When we can pay attention and really hang on to present moment awareness, we can learn better and more quickly. We can store information better. This is important for all of us, but certainly important for children and teenagers who are in school. And learning to pay attention, practicing present moment awareness is just as important, maybe even more so for children and teenagers. It's sort of a skill to be developed, I think. Paying attention helps us connect more deeply with others. And this might seem like an odd connection at first, but if you think about the last time you were in conversation with someone who was really there with you, there was eye contact, you could tell they were paying attention, they understood what you were saying, and think about how that made you feel, it probably made you feel more connected to them, and they probably felt more connected to you. Whereas if you are in an interaction with someone who's sort of impulsively checking their phone or, doing two other things while they're talking to you or sending an email and talking to you at the same time or something, it does leave us feeling sort of dismissed or disconnected. So paying attention and being in the present moment helps us build relationships with other people. And here's one that I hadn't really thought much about until I started to read this research. But it turns out that the ability to stay mentally present is highly correlated with life satisfaction and feeling happy. And let me tell you about a little study that, I shouldn't use the word little study, there's more than 5,000 people who've been involved in this study, so it's a pretty big study. It has been going on over the last few years. And it's a research project by two people by the name of Matt Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert. And they set out to understand what are the consequences of paying attention emotionally versus what are the consequences of mind wandering. And they've collected data on more than 5,000 people in something like 83 countries across the demographic spectrum. So it's a pretty internationally representative sample. And what they've concluded from their research is that the average adult, and again, this is average, so some of us the number will be higher, some of us the number will be lower, but the average adult is not paying attention nearly half of their waking hours. And in the past, when I've had this conversation and asked people if that number surprises them, I usually get lots of heads nodding, but I also get lots of comments about the fact that it's surprising that it's not higher than that, which to me indicates that many of us, I think especially in Western society, are aware that there's lots of temptation to be thinking about other things, that we're often lost in planning for the future or rehashing the past or multitasking or doing the opposite of being in the present moment. And there are consequences of this, and a lot of them have to do with our emotional state. So first of all, we know that when we're not paying attention to the present moment, we'll actually report, on average, feeling less happy than if we are in the present moment. And that, of course, has consequences for the actions or the reactions that we take in response to those emotions. And so really, what is being discovered, and most of you can probably relate to this on a personal note, is that where our mind is or what we are thinking is a better predictor of happiness than what we're doing, even if what we're doing is something that might be considered unpleasurable. So let me give you an example of this. This is a picture of my kids, and they're at Dinosaur World here, which actually doesn't have anything to do with the story. The story is that I noticed this appearing in my own life um, recently, and it happened when I was playing Uno with my kids. I don't have a picture of them playing Uno, which is why I put this random picture of them on a dinosaur up here. But anyway, I wanted you to be able to see my kids as I'm telling you this story. So one evening, we're in the habit of playing Uno before we're going to bed, and one evening I'm playing cards with them. And I would say that that for me is a pleasurable activity. I usually feel happy when I'm playing Uno with my kids. But in this particular evening, as sometimes happens, I had let my mind wander off. I was sort of mechanically playing Uno, and I think I was rehashing something that had happened that day that I didn't feel good about, kind of wishing it had gone differently or wishing I'd said something different. And that, of course, made me feel uncomfortable inside. It made me feel anxious, irritated, regretful. And so at that moment, my son reached over to grab a glass of water off the bookshelf, and he spilled it. He's 5, he spills things all the time. Now, normally that wouldn't have bothered me, but I snapped at him. And I snapped at him not because I was bothered that he spilled the water or not because I was having an unpleasant experience. I snapped at him because of where my mind had been. I had allowed my mind to take me to a place that was not present moment and that did not leave me feeling very good. And I reacted out of those uncomfortable emotions. So one of your takeaways for today might be just to observe in your own life how when you are not in the present moment, when you're either forward thinking or rehashing the past, what does that do to your emotional state and how do you react out of that emotional state? Okay, the second dimension of emotional style is outlook. An outlook is described as the degree to which you experience and sustain positive emotions. Now, you all probably know somebody, and maybe it's you, and if it's you, that's wonderful, congratulations. You all probably know somebody who has a very positive outlook, is usually upbeat, smiling, not a lot gets them down. And you also probably know somebody who's at the very negative end of the outlook spectrum. They're either kind of an Eeyore, like ho hum, I'm a victim, or they're very negative and complaining. Now, again, most of us fall somewhere in probably the middle range here and not at the extreme ends. But it turns out that outlook is really, really important to well-being in all sorts of ways. And here I'm going to bring in some work from Barbara Fredrickson. She is a researcher who spent the last couple of decades studying positive emotions. She's from the field of positive psychology. And I think she really adds a lot to this conversation about outlook and emotions and well-being. Now, one of the things she's done is describe the 10 most common positive emotions: joy, gratitude, serenity, interest, hope, pride, amusement, inspiration, awe, and love. Certainly there are other feel-good emotions, but she describes these as the top 10 most common positive emotions that we experience. So outlook can really be described as the degree to which we experience and sustain positive emotions like the ones you're seeing on your screen. Dr. Fredrickson has something that she calls the broaden and build theory, and it explains how positive emotions impact well-being. The broaden part is that when we're experiencing positive emotions, our awareness and our thinking are expanded. We're opened up, so to speak. And from that expanded awareness and broadened thinking, we're able to build psychological strengths, new effective mental habits, greater social connections, and greater physical health. And all of these have are really meaningful parts of well-being. So by psychological strengths, we're talking about optimism, openness to new experience, being accepting of the present moment. By effective mental habits, we're talking about being able to view problems from different angles and come up with creative solutions. By social connections, we're just talking about building our network of people who we trust and are supported by, and who trust and get support from us. And social connections are really, really rising to the top of the list of important factors in leading a long and healthful life. And then lastly, there's some cool research on positive emotions and physical health. Now, we all know that it's probably easier to experience positive emotions when we are in good physical health. So the relationship probably works that way as well. But what the Dr. Fredrickson's work and others indicates is that there's actually an effect that goes the opposite direction. That when we experience and sustain more positive emotions, or shift our positivity ratio, that's what she calls it, there are really impressive effects on our physical health. Reduction of all the things that you see on the left side of your screen: stress hormones, inflammation, fewer colds, shorter colds, lower risk of diabetes and stroke, and an increase in dopamine production, our body's natural painkillers, better quality sleep, better immune function, and even longer life. So I bring this up because I think that many times in health promotion, we take sort of, there is the tendency to take sort of an outside-in approach to well-being. And what this research and research like it indicates is that it's just as important, probably more important, to create well-being from the inside out, certainly starting with the development of positive emotions. The third component of emotional style is resilience. And resilience is the speed with which you recover from adversity. And by adversity, I mean everything like spilling a blob of coffee on your shirt as you're just about to walk into an important meeting, to losing a loved one, and everything in between. Adversity is a normal and expected part of life. We all run into challenges every day. But when we are faster to recover or more resilient, we get unstuck from the emotional muck around that adversity and can return to a neutral or positive emotional baseline more quickly. We can kind of let it go and move on more quickly. When we're slow to recover, we are often stuck in the muck. And one small thing that happens in the first part of the day can wreck a whole day. So we kind of hang on to the uncomfortable and unpleasant emotions, and we're less able to let those go and return to a more comfortable place, emotionally speaking. Really, resilience is very interconnected with positive emotions. Dr. Davidson's work, there's some cool work on sort of where resilience resides, so to speak, in the brain, but it is very connected with positive emotions. What we have seen is that people who are more resilient, quantitatively speaking, have lower levels of depression and anxiety, are likely to have stronger relationships, and will report that they're having a more positive overall life experience than people who are slower to recover or less resilient. So the three components of emotional style that we've talked about briefly here are attention, outlook, and resilience. And in the work of Dr. Davidson and Dr. Fredrickson and many other researchers who are studying similar things, there appear lots of ways to learn to pay better attention, to shift into positive emotions more often, and to become more resilient. But there is a very common thread that runs through a lot of the solutions. There's actually two, and those are mindfulness and practice. Or if you put it together, the practice of mindfulness. Now again, I don't want to say that practicing mindfulness is the only way that you can learn to pay attention or improve positive emotions or become more resilient, but this idea of practicing mindfulness is a common thread in the research that's appearing more and more often. Mindfulness is as you all know, a super huge buzzword in the industry. It has been for a few years and with good reason. But I often think that there's still a lot of murkiness around it. What does it really mean? And more importantly, how do we implement, how do we practice it on a daily basis? And how do we help others practice it? The definition you see here from John Kabat-Zinn is maybe the original. He's widely considered sort of the father of mindfulness in the West and has done a tremendous amount to make mindfulness accessible and practical. And so he describes mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And now that I have a deeper understanding of mindfulness, I really get that definition, but I don't think I got that definition years ago when I was first being introduced to mindfulness. So I want to talk about it in a couple different ways to leave you with a clear sense of what mindfulness really is if you don't already have one, and also maybe to give you some language to talk about it with others. So I like to think of mindfulness in two buckets, that there are two kind of buckets of ways to practice mindfulness. Maybe there are more, but in my mind, they fall into two buckets. And the first bucket is to have a kind of formal or sitting mindfulness meditation practice. And by mindfulness meditation, there's all sorts of options. You can do a simple mindfulness meditation focused on your breath, like we did at the start of our time together. You could bring your focus to an object like a candle and keep a soft gaze on a candle. You could even add a word to each exhale and make that word your point of focus. But the point is that you're keeping your mental awareness focused on one focal point, allowing everything else that exists and arises just to be without the need to change or intervene. There are other forms of mindfulness meditation. There's something called the body-mind-heart scan. That's one of the practical forms of mindfulness that we teach in Am I Hungry programs. And we teach it to people at first as a way to help them identify what's happening in their body that may or may not be signs of physical hunger. We then revisit it as a way to understand thoughts and emotions and just kind of understand what's happening in the body, mind, and heart so that we have the information we need to make good decisions. And then there's also a loving kindness or compassion meditation, where you're spending the time that you've carved out of the day to do this inner work, to cultivate positive, loving, kind thoughts about other people in your world, people that you know and love, people that you know and don't love, people you don't know, and even yourself. So the science is very clear that a regular practice of sitting meditation truly does, over time, rewire the brain, so to speak, in ways that are very valuable, both in the moment and long term. But I think for many people, this might be too big of a first step, or they may just not have the interest in developing a sitting meditation practice. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. That is perfectly fine. There's another bucket of ways to practice mindfulness that I call mindfulness in action. And what I mean by that is that just throughout your daily existence, you are regularly pausing, even if no one else knows that you've mentally paused. This is all inner work. Mindfulness in action means simply pausing to become aware of what's going on within you and around you, to notice thoughts and feelings and sensations and environmental cues, and to observe whatever you become aware of with a sense of curiosity and non-judgment. So just almost as if you're a reporter just looking for the facts. You don't need to get caught up in what you notice. You don't need to judge it. You don't even necessarily need to change it. You observe it with a sense of curiosity and acceptance. And from the space that is created when we pause and observe non-judgmentally, mindfulness really allows us to do a better job of intentionally choosing whether we'll respond, and if so, how we'll respond. Another way to think about mindfulness in action is when you notice a trigger, perhaps it's a thought, something happens in the environment, perhaps you notice that you have some uncomfortable emotions, that you simply get in the habit of pausing to notice whatever you felt or observed so that you can intentionally respond. And this, of course, is very different than the mode that most adults walk, and probably children too, exist in, where there is no pause, where there is a trigger and then there's a reaction. And it's very different to pause and intentionally respond than it is to not pause and automatically react. And so over time, whether it's a formal practice of sitting meditation or the practice of mindfulness in action, we are able to rewire our brain to slowly disconnect old neural pathways that no longer serve us and slowly create new neural pathways that do serve us and are in the service of others. And over time, this has a really tremendous impact on well-being and quality of life. So let me talk first about what all this has to do with health promotion, and then we'll tie this in with mindful eating. In health promotion, as I mentioned earlier, there tends to be a significant focus on behaviors and the body. And certainly it's important that our body is in good shape, and it's important that we get to the point of engaging in behaviors that contribute to well-being and quality of life. But what I think is becoming very clear is that that is an inside-out process. And unless the behaviors and the physical health changes are based on a solid foundation of thoughts and emotions and decision-making processes, then those changes are unlikely to last. So in your work, in your inner work with yourself and in your work with others, if you don't already, is it possible for you to bring more focus on the inside-out process? Can you focus more on the thoughts and emotions and decision-making processes and less directly on the behaviors and the body? And along those same lines, if you're in the position to determine what programs and services are offered to your employees, for example, if you're building programs, if you are a coach and in the practice of working with others, if you have any impact on what type of work you and your organization does related to well-being, can you employ more mindfulness-based strategies? If you don't have the right training, can you get that? Do you have any sway in bringing on mindfulness-based programs for your clients or patients or employees? And if the answer is yes, I would really encourage you to investigate that. And then in your work with clients and patients, if this stuff resonates with you and you want to do the work of mindfulness and the inside-out process of change and focusing on thoughts and emotions, help your clients and patients remember that mindfulness is a skill, or really a set of skills, that can be learned like any other skill, which is through regular practice. So if you wanted to learn to hula hoop and you didn't know how to hula hoop, what would you have to do? You'd have to practice. You'd have to practice specific behaviors. With mindfulness, what we're practicing is inner work. We're practicing paying attention, we're practicing creating space, we're practicing shifting into proactive positive emotions, we're practicing building resilience. Okay, so what does this have to do with mindful eating? Because we are a mindful eating organization, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of reel it back in and talk about how this can be applied in transforming your own relationship with food, if you are doing that work with yourself, or helping others transform their relationship with food through the process of mindful eating. The first way, if we go back to think about attention, attention is really just the noticing of what's going on here, what's happening in the present moment. And practicing the art of present moment awareness helps us see, almost objectively, the thoughts and feelings and sensations and cues that might drive us to eat when we're not hungry or overeat once we start. And so as we learn to pay more attention in all aspects of our lives, we become better at noticing in the moment what's happening internally and externally, and also noticing the impulses we might have to react by eating, overeating, or even restricting food intake. The second way that attention is relevant to mindful eating is it's of course helpful during the process of eating. In fact, the decision point, how do I eat, for those of you that are familiar with our mindful eating cycle model, this decision point is all about eating with more intention and attention. We offer participants of our programs a variety of opportunities for paying more attention to the process of eating itself for a couple of reasons. And one of them is so that they can enjoy the process of eating more. They can enjoy their food and the eating experience more. Because many times if we are eating in the midst of distractions or caught up in emotions or just simply not paying attention, we miss the very pleasurable experience that we are seeking. And also, we help participants with some opportunities for paying more attention so that they'll be more likely to notice signs of satiation and satisfaction that are our body's way of telling us we've had enough. Let me give you a few examples of how we apply attention to the process of eating. We might encourage participants to experiment with clearly assessing their hunger level before eating through a body, mind, heart scan, or just by checking in with the question, am I hungry? We encourage participants to, as much as possible, eat in a pleasant environment and minimize distractions. The type of distractions, for example, that might prevent us from being able to really enjoy our eating experience or that might create emotions, uncomfortable emotions that can drive overeating. We also encourage participants to consider centering themselves before and during eating. Just take a few deep breaths, notice what's there. Are there swirling thoughts? Are there emotions that need to reside? What's happening and what do you need to do to really be present with this eating experience? And then, of course, we encourage people to simply notice their food. How does it smell? How does it look? What's delicious on your plate? What do you really want to eat and what do you not want to eat? If you just took a bite of something, was it as delicious as you wanted? And do you want to have more of that or do you want to have something else? These are a handful of the examples of the ways that we help people in our programs pay more attention to food and eating and their body so that they can have the best experience possible and also be present for the information they need to stop it just right rather than overfull. Okay, so what does outlook have to do with mindful eating? Cultivating a more positive outlook is really about shifting your emotional state so that when you're experiencing uncomfortable emotions, you can shift those to more positive ones over time. And you can probably already think of one direct way that this applies to the work we do in mindful eating. We know that one of the three categories of non-hunger triggers, or the things that cause us to eat when we're not hungry, are emotions. And we know that any type of emotion can be a trigger for non-hunger eating, but in my experience, I've found that more often people engage in emotional eating as a result of uncomfortable or unpleasant emotions, like anxiety or loneliness or overwhelm. As most of you know, our approach to mindful eating really helps people dig deep to address the root causes. And so for people for whom unpleasant emotions are a source of emotional eating, working to shift their positivity ratio in general can ultimately create less of the emotional triggers that drive the type of eating they no longer want to do. And so ultimately, the work around shifting emotional state and creating more positive outlook is very beneficial in the process of transforming relationship with food. Now, broadening this out specifically further than just specifically emotional eating, if you recall from earlier in our conversation, I shared some of the many benefits of creating a more positive outlook. And you'll recall I talked about how positive emotions lie at the heart of our ability to build psychological strengths, effective mental habits, greater social connection, and better physical health. These are all really valuable improvements for a person who desires to heal their relationship with food. and learn to eat mindfully. And I'm just going to give you one example, but there are many examples that I could pull from here. Let's talk about psychological strengths. By building psychological strengths, what we're talking about is being more optimistic, more open to new experience, and more accepting of the present moment. So if attention is paying attention to the present moment and noticing what's there, part of this psychological strengths idea is that we can accept whatever is happening with as little resistance as possible. As we move through the process of reducing overeating or yo-yo dieting or getting away from restrictive eating, the process of transforming relationship with food by its very nature requires that we are open to doing things in a new way, that we can be optimistic and hopeful about the fact that this can work, and that we can be accepting of the present moment. Now, I want to point out that being accepting doesn't mean that you like what's happening in the present moment or that you don't work towards making things different, but that you simply see the moment for what it is with as little resistance to it as possible so that you can become aware of all your options and intentionally choose how to respond. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you realize in the middle of eating that you were totally not hungry when you started, but you were just anxious and overwhelmed, and you used food to distract and calm yourself. A very common scenario. The ability to notice that you did that without beating yourself up, and then embark upon a little inner work to figure out what happened, what needs attention, and what you might do differently next time. This is a process that will definitely go better if you are more optimistic, more open to experience, and more accepting of the present moment. So just another example of how working on these larger aspects of emotional style can really create a stronger foundation for changing the way that we relate to food. And lastly, let's talk about resilience for a minute. There's lots of applications for resilience in mindful eating. One of them has to do with the fact that resilience is about how quickly you recover from adversity. And let's face it, adversity is always going to be a part of any self-change process, and that certainly includes changing the way we relate to food and what we do with it. No meaningful change comes without roadblocks and obstacles and setbacks and frustrations, and how we deal with those obstacles and roadblocks becomes essential to whether or not we ultimately have success with our endeavor. When we're not very resilient, we're likely to be kind of stuck in the emotional muck longer when something doesn't go the way we wish it had. When we're more resilient, we're able to return to a more positive emotional baseline right away, to talk to ourselves in encouraging rather than discouraging ways, and to really tap into optimism that all is well. Now, if you think about it, if a person has been struggling with overeating for years or decades, or stuck in cycles of yo-yo dieting for a long time, the journey towards a balanced, enjoyable relationship with food is going to be a significant one. It doesn't happen overnight. And along the way, as with any meaningful change, there are going to be some ups and some downs, some roadblocks and some obstacles. And so cultivating resilience and the ability to overcome adversity, talk about it to ourselves in positive ways, and let go and move on is really important. I want to wrap by bringing this all back to the image I showed earlier of an upward spiral, because I think it represents a key message in this conversation, which has to do with the relationship between how we are taking care of ourselves holistically and what we choose to do with food and eating. So when we're practicing present moment awareness and attending to emotional needs and developing resilience in a broad sense, it really supports a positive transformation in our relationship with food. And it can work in reverse. When we're practicing attention and emotional regulation and resilience around food and eating, it can lead to or further support these practices in the rest of our life. So we end up creating sort of an upward spiral of sorts where we feel better internally, We make more effective decisions around food, which makes us feel even better internally, which further helps us heal a troubled relationship with food. And I would say this upward spiral idea applies to any specific type of behavior change. I think there's great application for attending to emotional style that can be specific to any type of behavior change, not just eating. So I want to just, if you're interested in further reading some of this work, and the research review came from Dr. Davidson's book, The Emotional Life of Your Brain, Dr. Frederickson's work on positivity. Wanted to just include those in case you want to jot down the titles. And what I'm going to do is I'd love to spend the rest of the time today on your feedback, on your questions, and I'm going to leave my contact information on the screen as I take your questions. So I see I've already got 3 in the hopper, and for those of you that have anything else you want to add or ask, go ahead and send those in. Susanna asked, will there be a recording with slides? I couldn't take notes and focus fast enough as this is mostly new to me, so I chose to listen without notes. Great info. Susanna, thank you for choosing the mindful option and just absorbing the information. There will be a recording, and you will see the slides in conjunction with the audio. We'll send that out in an email to everybody who registered for the presentation after the fact. And Susanna, I appreciate that note. In the future, I will remember to kind of let people know that so that they can just absorb and not have to furiously scribble down notes. Christina asks, has there been research on to what degree social support impacts resilience? That's a great question, Christina. I suspect there probably has been, but I don't know where to, I wouldn't know where to refer you specifically. I do know that social support, the more I read and the more I learn, is truly close to the top of the list. And it seems that having a social network, and you don't have to have a lot of people in it, but having at least one or a couple of deeply connected relationships is as important to well-being, quality of life as not smoking, possibly more so. So I bet there is, but I don't know specifically where to send you for that. And Barbara says, oh, this is a great question, is it really possible to be non-judgmental? Barbara, I would say the answer to your question is yes, anything is possible. But I would also say that as human beings, we are pretty hardwired to be constantly making judgments about ourselves and other people and lots of other things. And of course, we have to make snap judgments about things. Otherwise, we'd never be able to make a decision in the moment. But I think the practice of mindfulness, and I will truly tell you that it has impacted my life this way and a lot of people I know, what it does is it creates space. It creates the opportunity to be less judgmental, less attached, less emotional. And I would say that, probably for people who've practiced mindfulness meditation and other forms of mindfulness for very long periods of time, there probably is a truly clean non-judgmentalness about their attitude and perceptions. I think for many of us, it's something to work towards. And so instead of non-judgmental, we might say less judgmental. Let me know if that helps, Barbara. We can talk further about it if you'd like. And Courtney says, what kind of activities do you recommend doing to help patients and clients build resilience? So Courtney, outside of the practice of mindfulness, one of the other things that Dr. Davidson talks about that helps build resilience is sort of reframing in the practice of reframing, because resilience is really about how we talk to ourselves. So if we spill a blop of coffee on our shirt before we walk into a meeting, a highly resilient person might say something like, oh, darn it, I wish that hadn't happened, but oh well, I'm human, let's just move on. A person lower on the resilience scale might talk to themselves in ways that like, gosh, I can't believe that happened. I'm so stupid. I always do things like that. So resilience is really very much about how we talk to ourselves. And one of the recommendations was for people to practice reframing. And reframing is really the act of examining your own thoughts or the situation and talking to yourself about them differently. So trying to see them through a new lens, trying to engage in different conversation with yourself around it. Certainly that's a practice, that's one of the many techniques that's often done in cognitive behavioral therapy. But I don't think that you need to be a therapist or be in therapy to practice the art of reframing. And so if you can work with your clients and patients on observing the language they use with themselves when they face adversity and beginning to change their language so that it's more encouraging, optimistic, open, and hopeful, I think you would have probably help them make great strides. Trudy asks, have you done any work on fitting this into a context of spirituality and faith? Trudy, I have not done that work. I think that this, and I'm sure there is, people talking about this very stuff out there through the lens of spirituality and faith. I will just tell you personally that I am not a particularly traditionally religious person. And for me, the practice of mindfulness has become a sense, in some ways, it has become my spirituality. It is where my strength comes from in some ways. So I don't know about any specific work, but I think there's great overlap between the work that we've talked about today and spirituality and faith. I think the work we've talked about today can fit in many other contexts, including religion and spirituality. Oh, Cheryl sent something in. She said, Dr. Kristen Neff in Self-Compassion and Dr. Kelly McGonigal in The Upside of Stress refer to research on the benefit of social support. So let me say that again for those of you that are interested in more information on the benefit of social support. Dr. Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, in a book called Self-Compassion, and Dr. Kelly McGonigal, M-C-G-O-N-I-G-A-L, in a book called The Upside of Stress. Thank you, Cheryl. Caitlin says, thank you for a wonderful webinar. You're very welcome. Thank you for being here. I often use ME techniques with my patients. To what degree, or what is a gentle way to introduce these kinds of concepts with patients who are kind of at rock bottom or going through a very difficult time? For example, I had a patient yesterday who was grieving the loss of her pregnant granddaughter who died a few months ago from a heroin overdose. Oh boy, that's a tough one. I think when people are have just experienced something very traumatic, there's probably a place and time for this conversation, but I would say that it's not right away. Again, I have not been a therapist for many years and do not claim to be an expert on this, but my gut tells me that talking about outlook and resilience can be valuable for them in a little while, but perhaps the first part of the process is just for them to be given the space to grieve and be supported through that process. And so maybe, Caitlin, if you're working with a patient who's just gone through something like that, you could leave it up to them when they're ready to hear about this. You might suggest that you think you have some techniques that could be helpful to get them back to baseline more quickly, and you'd be happy to share that with them when they're ready, and maybe leave it up to them to tell you when they're ready for whatever it is you have to offer. That's just my two cents there. If anybody else wants to chime in, please feel free. Okay, so Maria says, I am a firm believer in mindfulness and all that you say. I use it in my practice with clients who are easier to work with and more accepting of this message philosophy than some of my colleagues. How do you get the message across to people who are weight focused and believe mindfulness is airy-fairy? I love the term airy-fairy. That is a really big conversation. Maria, we put out a paper. It's available on our website, but you can also email me and I will send you the paper. And it's called Powerful Conversations to Lead the Shift from Weight to Wellbeing. And in it, we deliver a communication framework, a way to talk about things other than weight to people who may be stuck in the weight focus. And Not only does it give you a framework, but it gives you a few open-ended questions to ask. It can give you some ways to kind of understand their perspective and reframe and offer alternatives. So what you're asking is a really common question, and so much so that we wrote a whole paper on it. If you email me, I will send you that paper, and that goes for any of you who are with us today. If you just want to email me at rjohnson@amihungry.com, I can send you the Powerful Conversations paper, and it might give you a little bit of help in having those, what I know are very challenging conversations. Oh, okay. So Trudy says, I am familiar with Pete Scazzero's, I probably just chopped his name up, Pete Scazzero's work titled Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Should you get other questions regarding faith and mindfulness, you might refer them to this resource. Okay, so let me say that again. Anyone interested in information on faith and mindfulness, the work is titled Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and the author's name is Pete, and his last name is Scazzero. Okay, let's see. Have we? Oh, Donna asked early on, will this presentation be posted on the member portal? For those of you who are Am I Hungry licensees, yes, this will be on the portal in the amihungry.net, and you can find it in the additional training section. Give us a day or two, but it should be up there pretty soon. I'm going to take one more scroll here. Let me go over to chat to see if there's anybody. We've got a couple of chats here. Marilyn says, I like the mindfulness in action because many of my clients don't buy into the daily sitting practice. Are there any other suggestions for simple activities to do with group to help them ease into the mindfulness practice? Yes, Marilyn, and we offer lots of practical mindfulness-based techniques in our programs and training. The body, mind, heart scan that I mentioned is one. I think also just introducing the idea of pausing to take a couple of breaths. I mean, honestly, that's mindfulness in action, but most people that I talk with about this really resonate with the idea and feel immediate benefits from simply pausing, particularly when they feel uncomfortable emotions. Let those uncomfortable emotions be your red flag to pause. And in that pause, do whatever you want. But one really good thing to do is to take a couple of breaths, because it creates a space between a trigger and a potential reaction and allows us to make it more of a response. So I would play around with just the idea of pausing to take a couple of deep breaths. I mean, it's kind of what we learned as children and often teach children. If you're having a little temper tantrum, pause and count to 10 while you breathe. The same thing really applies for adults. So that might be a very practical way to introduce something. You don't even have to use the word mindfulness, just creating space and pausing and breathing. You can get a lot of mileage out of that, and then maybe introduce more, longer or slightly more complex mindfulness techniques. And Nancy says, I'd also appreciate your paper regarding wellness and weight focus. Anybody that wants that paper, if you would, just send me an email and I will send that to you directly. Okay, let me just take one more scroll. I think we've covered the questions, and that is amazing timing because it's exactly 3 o'clock Eastern. So please feel free to contact me directly if there's something you want to talk about that we didn't get covered today, or you want to just continue the conversation, or you want information about our programs and training. I love this stuff, would love to hear from you, and really appreciate your time today. I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you for being here.